Our talk on the mind is to sit very quietly and carry on your meditation, because when the mind is still and calm, then the mind is open to new ideas. When the mind is agitated, restless, and thinking is going on, and it's very hard for us to focus our minds on what is said. So it's very important to be calm, be still, so you do not disturb your own mind and don't disturb the minds of others. Because the Buddhist path is a path of stilling, a path of calming, and a path of purification. And this evening I would like to actually say something in detail about the Buddhist path of purification. In Pali it is known as the Visuddhi Magga. Visuddhi is freedom, and the Magga is path. So it's the path to freedom. And in the path to freedom, there are certain aspects to this path that the Buddha pointed out, and I wanted to explain those in detail. And please bear with me if you're new to Buddhism this evening, because I'm going to go into some detail about the refinement of the Buddhist spiritual progress on the path to enlightenment. Now, the various stages of purification in Buddhism on the spiritual path have been described in detail in one of the discourses that you find in the middle-length sayings, the Majjhima Nikaya, and it's called, it's the discourse number 24, the Majjhima Nikaya, called the Relay of Chariots. And in that discourse, the Venerable Sariputta, who was the senior right-hand disciple of the Buddha and renowned for his wisdom, he went to seek out another monk named Venerable Punna, and when he met that venerable monk, and both these monks were both fully enlightened, he asked him a question, and basically that question is a very pertinent question for us, I think. It was about his spiritual path. And he asked him, for what reason do you live the holy life, the spiritual life, under the Buddha, the guidance of the Buddha? And he said, in summary, I live the holy life under the Buddha for the complete ending of craving, for the non-becoming of existence, for nibbana, enlightenment. And then Sariputta actually put a series of questions to him, which are very interesting, and I'll go into detail about those questions later on in the talk. But the first question he asked him was, your living of the holy life under the Buddha for enlightenment, does that include the purification of virtue? Do you live the holy life purely for the purification of virtue? And he answered no, that the Buddhist path is not just to become a good person. That is not the end aim of Buddhism, just to be a virtuous person. And then Sariputta asked him, do you live the holy life under the Buddha to purify the mind? That is, to develop peace. Is your aim of living a spiritual life just to become a more peaceful person? And he said no. The holy life is not lived under the Buddha just to become more peaceful. And then he asked, do you live the holy life under the Buddha to overcome doubt purify your view. That is, purify your view, your outlook on life, your attitude to life. And he said, no. The holy life is not lived just to purify view. The next question he asked is, do you live the holy life under the Buddha to overcome doubt about existence? Where we were born, where we're coming from, what is the nature of existence? And Venerable Punna said, no, that is not the reason I live the holy life. And then he asked, do you live the holy life to develop knowledge of the path, what is the path to enlightenment and what is not the path to enlightenment? And he again answered no. And then Sariputta asked him, do you live the holy life to develop knowledge of the way to enlightenment? And he answered no. And then lastly he answered, do you live the holy life to develop knowledge and vision? That is, understanding, wisdom. And he said no. And then finally he asked him, well, again, what do you live the holy life for? And he repeated his answer, I live the holy life under the Buddha for the complete ending of craving, for the overcoming of existence, for nibbana, enlightenment. And then Sariputta went on to ask, well, how is that possible? Doesn't enlightenment include all these 7 things, these 7 practices, these 7 purifications? And Venerable Punna said, yes, it does, but they are not an end in themselves. But they are necessary. And he said, I'll give you a simile. It's like a king who wants to travel from point A to point B over a great distance. And that king, in the old days, uses a set of chariots, a relay of chariots. And this is where the name of the discourse comes from. He uses 7 sets of chariots, rides in one chariot with one set of horses until they get tired and reach the end of their tether, and then changes to another set of horses in another chariot and goes on until it takes 7 sets of horses and 7 chariots to get to his destination. But the aim of the king is to reach point B, his destination. It is not just to go, for example, from the first part of the journey to the ending of where the horses got tired on the first chariot and get out there. But it is necessary to go through those 7 stages, those 7 points, till he gets to point B. And so too, the spiritual path of the Buddha is necessary. It is necessary to go through each of these 7 purifications to get to full enlightenment. But each of these stages are not an end in itself. And this point is a very significant point because it does lead to an understanding of the difference between, say, Buddhism and other religions. And I'll go on to explain this. The first one of the spiritual paths that the Sariputta mentions in this sutta is, do you lead the spiritual path for the purification of virtue? And what this means is purification of virtue here implies the purification according to the 5 precepts as a basis. Now, one has to develop purification of virtue to get to enlightenment. But virtue in itself is not an end. It is one of the chariots on our journey. It will take us a certain length, a certain distance, but it has an end in itself. It is not a complete path. And you see there are some spiritual paths that just emphasize virtue, being a good person, being a wholesome person, developing generosity. And the Buddhist teaching definitely emphasizes that is absolutely essential to develop this first purification. It is our first chariot ride, which will take us to enlightenment. The purification of virtue here, as many of you know, is the purification of the 5 precepts. To develop harmlessness by not killing even the smallest creature. To develop honesty by not taking what is not given. Develop trust and honesty in your sexual relationships with other people, with your partner, so that you're not breaking that trust. And love is always based on trust. And if that trust is broken, it leads to many problems. And not to speak falsehoods or use harsh speech, gossip or slander. Because if we're looking for truth, then we have to train our speech to speak what is true, what is wholesome, what is beneficial to ourselves and beneficial to others, what is pleasing to hear, what is gentle, what is kind, and what leads to concord, not disharmony. And if we're looking for wisdom and clarity, we have to consume those things which are going to enhance clarity of mind, not consume, for example, drugs or intoxicants which are going to lead to confusion, to heedlessness, to foolishness. And we all know how alcohol, for example, and drugs can lead to a lot of foolishness in society and in ourselves in particular. So this is the basis. This is what we're purifying first in virtue. But also the purity of virtue has another level, which means the purity of the senses, sense restraint. And this means being composed. Just as we're sitting here, if we've got our eyes shut, we're composing our eye. We're restraining the visual impressions of the eye, so that we're taking less in through the eye. And if we're taking less in through the eye, we're seeing less, then that is actually calming. It helps to calm the mind because the mind is not being stimulated by brightness, by light, by visual impressions. If we compose the ear, so we're actually noting sound, knowing it, and not allowing the mind to run out, to get involved in the sound. That's the sound of a dog, that's the sound of a car, that's the sound of that person wriggling again. If we just note sound arising, passing away, then there's a calming there, a stilling. If we restrain the other senses, we're not looking for sensual pleasure and gratification through the body, gratification of taste and touch and smell, then you'll find that actually there's a sense of contentment arising. If we're sitting here right now and we're just content to sit here right now, then there's peace. But if we sit here at this present point, at this moment in time, and we want some other sensual gratification, for example, we want to hear something in particular, want to see something in particular, want to taste something, want to feel more comfortable, then there's going to be discord in the mind, the disharmony. The mind will not be at peace. So this composure of the mind, this contentment of the present moment, brings the mind to a state of purity. And this purification needs to be cultivated. The next level of purification in virtue, in the field of virtue, is the purification of one's livelihood. And many of you may know that in Buddhism we talk about right livelihood. That is, earning one's living or living one's life which is not going to be exploitive of other human beings or other creatures in this world. For example, we're not producing, say, weapons, producing things that are going to take life, for example, poisons. Or we're not having an exploitive occupation, for example, which is involved in the exploitation of other people's labor in a wrong way. For example, in the prostitution trade would be wrong livelihood according to Buddhism, or exploiting other people in that way. We're using our lifestyle so that it is harmless in the world. We're walking through the world and obtaining our living in the world in a gentle way, in a compassionate way, and in a kind way. We're not seeking out to make a dollar out of the suffering of other human beings or other creatures in this world. So this right livelihood is very important to reflect on that. And some of the other wrong livelihoods in Buddhism is to have a livelihood which involves killing, that is destroying life. And that's another thing that we can purify. We can change our livelihood so that it is something which is beneficial to ourselves, to others, and to both. Doesn't mean we have to go out and help the world in a do-gooding situation, but we're obtaining our welfare, our material well-being in a wholesome way, in a skillful way, in a harmless way. The next purification of virtue is the purification of not only livelihood, but purification of use of our material possessions. And this carries on from livelihood. And this means that we're actually not seeking gratification just through materialism, but we're on a spiritual path. Because I think all of you who are here tonight are very aware that material gratification is just that much. It satisfies us for a short time, but there's a lack of perfection. Once we get what we want, we're often dissatisfied very quickly with it. Or we're separated from that thing. And therefore, the mind has this sense of lacking, a sense of incompletement. And because of that, then we're seeking something else. Now, this purification of using the things that we have, our clothing, our shelter, our food, our medicines when sick, the 4 basic requisites of life, we're using with restraint. We're knowing when we have enough. And we also know when we're just seeking after, craving for pleasure through materialism. That will never take us to peace. Ajahn Chah used to often teach, when people would come to him, he would say, you don't have to do anything in your life, just meditate on it's enough. And if you are distracted, you are not at peace, then this is often a very good meditation to say, it's enough. And actually, at this present moment, as we sit here right now, it's perfect. It's enough. We're not too hungry, we're not too hot, we're not too cold. We've got everything we need just right now, except a happy mind. If we just have that attitude of mind to be satisfied with all the material things we have right now, then it's enough. We don't have to seek any more. And that is a skillful reflection, especially for us living in the West, who we definitely do have enough. And so this is the first level of purification. The Buddhist path involves a purification on this moral level, on the level of virtue. But virtue is not an end in itself. And I was speaking to someone today about this. It's very often you notice that people who take virtue as an end in itself get very self-righteous, puritanical. They lack understanding. That they see that virtue makes them in some ways holier than thou. Virtue is extremely important, and without virtue one cannot become enlightened. And the enlightened person always maintains and keeps virtue. But it is not an end in itself, as a goal for the spiritual life of Buddhism. Virtue takes you on to the next stage. And the next stage in the spiritual path is the purification of mind. Once we've purified those outer things of body and speech, then we come to purifying the mind. And the way we purify the mind is firstly by stilling the mind. We calm the mind down. That is why we meditate, say, for example, on the in-breathing and the out-breathing, to still the mind. And the aim of stilling the mind is to make the mind clearer, so that we develop more understanding. But it is important to ask, what are we purifying the mind of? What we are purifying the mind of is the 5 hindrances. And for people who are familiar with Buddhism or have done meditation courses, you will know what the 5 hindrances are. These are the very things that hinder the mind from peace, or hinder the mind to peace. They are the obstructions to happiness. They are obstructions to tranquility. And they are ill will, sensuality, restlessness, doubt, sleepiness, and restlessness and worry. And when these 5 hindrances arise, they are what block the mind from actually seeing tranquility. Now, what we're trying to do is actually purify the mind of these hindrances, overcome them. So if there is, ill will in the mind, that is what hinders us to obtaining peace. And we develop, say, a meditation object to purify the mind by focusing the mind just on that object, for example, the breath, until these 5 hindrances are purified out of the mind. And then what replaces those 5 hindrances is their very opposite. There's applied application of mind to the meditation object, sustained application of mind to the meditation object, rapture and happiness, and one-pointedness of mind. These are the things which are the direct opposite to those hindrances to peace. Then, once we develop and purify the mind to this point, the mind will absorb into the object of meditation and enter what we call the first jhana, the first absorption. Then, as we refine the mind, as we focus closer and closer on that object of meditation, then the applied and sustained application of mind will fall away, and there will just be happiness and rapture. There will be one-pointedness of mind, and there will also be equanimity there as a condition, quality. Then we refine the mind, purify the mind even more. To rapture falls away, and there's just pure happiness in the mind. This is the third jhana. This is the ultimate happiness that can be experienced in the world of the unenlightened being, is the mind in the third jhana, where there's just pure happiness, there's equanimity, and there's one-pointedness of mind. The equanimity arises, but it's very weak in this stage. It's equanimous to just stay in that state. It's not seeking from some other state. Then, as the happiness falls away, we refine and purify the mind from that happiness. Then there's just left equanimity and one-pointedness of mind. And this is pure awareness. This is the state of pure mindfulness and pure equanimity. When the mind is developed to the jhanas, the fourth jhana, then we have purified the mind. There are 4 other, what we call arupa jhanas, the formless jhanas, which can be developed as well. And these jhanas, these absorptions of mind, lead to the purification of mind temporarily. But once you come out of that state, then these 5 hindrances of ill will, sensuality, doubt, sleepiness, restlessness and worry, they can overtake the mind again, and we can be affected by them. So this purification of mind is only a temporary state. Therefore, it is not an end in itself, because one has to come out of that, and then the conditioning of the mind takes over. So these are the first two stages on the purification of the spiritual path. The next aspect of purification, the next 5 aspects of purification are actually to do with wisdom. And these are the insight qualities of Buddhism. That is, they lead to insight, knowledge and vision, clear understanding. And the insight, knowledge and vision, clear understanding, leads to comprehension. So what we're doing in the last 5 stages is purifying our wisdom. Now it's very important to know what wisdom is. We often hear the word, and it has many meanings in many contexts. Now I'm going to talk about these 5 conditions because these are the 5 things that the Buddha talked about as wisdom according to the Buddhist understanding of that word. It's very important to know what the Buddha actually said, what the Buddhist path is and how it's different from, say, other paths. The next purification that we're developing is, after having developed purification of our virtue, purification of mind, is the purification of our view, how we view the world, how we view ourselves. And this purification of view is actually looking at this body and mind. What am I? What makes up this being that I call self? Yes. So we're developing a clearer understanding of this being, which is born, grows old, sick and dies, which experiences feelings, which experiences perceptions, which experiences thoughts and states of consciousness. What is it and how does it interact with the world? And this is what we're doing, is looking at how we look at the body and mind. Do I take the body and mind to be self, for example? Do I take the body and mind to be permanent? Do I take the body and mind to be happiness? Do I take the body and mind to be beautiful, to be wonderful, to be perfect in itself? If you do, then you'll suffer, because the body and mind changes. And we can note that change, we can see that change. The body and mind, because it changes, is imperfect, it is unsatisfactory. And what is changing, is imperfect, is that worthy of calling me? Is that worthy of calling mine? Is that worthy of calling self? No. And when we delve into the body, is it beautiful in its ultimate sense? When we take off the skin, what is underneath is not very beautiful. When we start taking the body apart, just as with that clarity and clear comprehension that a surgeon would do when they operate on a body. When you do an autopsy, take a body apart, as a medical student, as a nurse, then you see that what is inside the body is not all that pleasant, it's not all that beautiful. It's not beautiful in an ultimate sense of the word. It is not perfect. And because it grows old, sick, and finally dies, then it is very imperfect. So we cannot find perfection in the body. Neither can we find perfection in the state of mind that is experiencing the 5 hindrances. So then when we start changing our view, how we look at ourselves, we start to look at the body as a changing phenomena, that as we're sitting here, it is constantly going through a process of change. It is growing older as we sit here. The molecules are changing all the time. The cells are dying off and changing all the time. There's an interaction with the world that's going on naturally as we sit here, completely involuntary. It just happens by itself. and we see our mind is shifting all the time. So when we start to look at the body as, well, this body is not really ultimately me. This mind, I cannot control it. And we see in meditation, it's very difficult to control this mind. We want to think on the object, we want to place our attention on the object. It's very hard to do. And so we start to have a different view of the body and mind. We start to see that the body is made up of the 4 elements. It is the element of earth, which is the solid element, for example, the bones, made up of earth. We consume food, which comes from the earth. And that gives that solidity. That's what calcium is, isn't it? It's an element of earth, which makes up the body. That gives its hardness to the body. The body is over 96 or 98% water. So there's a large percentage of water element in the body. There's the fire element, which is the heat quality, that thing which produces warmth or lack of it. And then there is the air element, which is the wind of the body, also the spaces, the breath going into the lungs, the wind in the stomach, and also the spaces in the body, the space in the ear, the nose. And when we actually look at that, we see that this body is made up of its elements. And if you actually look, where is the boundary, say, between skin and air? If you look at that on a microscopic level, you see that actually the pores of the skin are actually quite open. And where does the molecules of skin finish and where does the molecules of air begin? For a physicist, there's no distinction there. It's very hard to say that this is clear-cut line. There isn't one. There's an interaction there. So when we actually start to break down the body, look at it in detail, in a refined way, and that's what meditation is about. It's looking at things in detail. Are they really as we take them to be? Then we start to view things differently. And this leads to the second stage of purification, where it becomes purification of doubt. We lead to the overcoming of doubt. Our understanding of the world changes. We don't have this confusion about what we are, who we are, where we're going. We start to see that we're a result of karma. What we do, we will experience the fruit of that. Therefore, we become very skillful and very wise about what we do. And then we start to overcome our doubt about the things that we should be looking at to understand existence. We start to look at the body and mind. That's all you have to know. You do not have to know everything in the world. All you have to do is know this body and mind, and that will lead to the complete ending of your suffering. And that's what we're studying. And so this leads to an understanding of the next purification is we develop a purification to know very clearly and wisely what is the spiritual path and what isn't the spiritual path. That is, what do we investigate and what do we look at to put an end to our suffering? And what we investigate is this thing that we call self. That's all we're looking at. And what do we call self? We call self body, we call self feeling, we call self perception, we call self thought, and we call self consciousness. The Buddha said there is nothing outside of these 5 things that you can designate as being a self. This is what human beings recognize as me and mine. But that recognition is a wrong recognition, and that is the problem for our existence. So what we're doing is investigating the path to overcome suffering. And the way we do that is to actually look at, say, feeling. When feeling arises, to look at it. Is this feeling permanent or impermanent? Is this feeling satisfactory or unsatisfactory? If it is impermanent and unsatisfactory, is that worthy of calling self? And that is why I also got you to look at sound this evening. Because with this investigation, we're looking at perception as well. As we sat here this evening, we're perceiving sound as it arises, then passes away. Now that's something you can know, that sound has arisen, then ceased. Now that knowledge is just recognizing sound as an impingement on the sense organ of the ear. And when there's a sound arising, it impinges on a functioning ear, and there's a recognition of that. There's the ear consciousness arises. Therefore, we know that is a sound. Then perception comes in and memorizes that sound. Is that a sound of a person or a dog? And we label it according to our conditioning. Now, this is actually something we can know in meditation. And this knowledge arises out of very deep meditation. For many of you who have just come here for the first or second time and have never developed this, what we call insight meditation, then you probably are not following this point. But what you can know is, for example, sound arising and ceasing. Now, if it arises, is it permanent or impermanent? Obviously impermanent. What is impermanent, is that satisfying? Can you rely on it? Can you find security in that? Is it perfection? No, because it's ceased. Therefore, it cannot be relied on. What is unreliable, is that worthy of calling self? What is ceased, is that worthy of calling self? What is in the past, is that worthy of calling self? No. And so this perception and purification of knowledge of what is and what is not the path arises at this point of investigating what we call the five khandhas, the five aggregates. We start to look at them and question them. Is what I am understanding true or not? Is what I am perceiving in the world true or not? And this happens in deep meditation. And once we start to develop this understanding of what is and what is not the path, then we start to see very clearly the way, the path. We actually develop this understanding of the path. And this understanding of the path comes on to actually knowing what we should be doing in our investigation. Now, at this point, often for the meditator, there is many experiences that can arise which make people think they're already enlightened, for example. And these are what we call the vipassana kilesas. And at this point, when we're seeing the way to enlightenment, we see what we should be doing and how to apply it, and we're seeing the path ahead of us, we know the Noble Eightfold Path, then certain things can be experienced in the meditation. For example, bright light, illumination of the mind, which can last for many, many days. Serene peace, knowledge, equanimity, concentration, rapture, happiness. All these conditions can arise, and also attachment. Now, the reason that these are not an end in themselves is because they're impermanent. And the reason they're called defilements, even though they're wholesome things in itself, for example, knowledge, vision, peace, happiness, are very skillful things in themselves, very good things in themselves. The reason they're called defilements of the mind is because we mistake them for being much more than they are. We overestimate in them. We think we've already obtained some sort of higher state, some sort of liberation, and it in itself is not permanent. That is why in the Buddhist path you're always investigating everything according to permanence. Is this permanent or impermanent? That is why Ajahn Chah used to say, if you think you're enlightened, then you should say, well, it's uncertain. Yes. If you think you've had a good meditation, obtained jhanas, then you should say, well, it's uncertain. And then investigate. Was it certain? If it's sure, then it's repeatable. If it is enlightenment experience, it will not deteriorate. It will be permanent. It cannot deteriorate. That's the quality of that ultimate change that happens. And so what we're doing is we're investigating things according to their permanency, their satisfaction, and their selfhood. And we're seeing that they don't stand up. Actually, they are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and non-self. And this is the way we investigate all phenomena, all experience. And this is what we call wisdom. This is how you apply wisdom. Wisdom is something we apply in daily life, and it's what we apply in meditation, to investigate, to discern, to be circumspect, to look at reality as it really is, not as we'd like it to be. And as we're investigating on this path, we get to the next stage of this knowledge and vision. And this knowledge and vision is the last of the 7 purifications. And this is the last of the purifications. Knowledge and vision. First we've developed knowledge and vision of what is the right and wrong path. Then we develop knowledge and vision of the way to enlightenment. And the last step on the purifications is we develop knowledge and vision of actual enlightenment. And this is the process where the meditator sees and knows enlightenment for themselves. And in this last step, this is where craving is overcome. This is where the 4 stages of enlightenment can be obtained. And the first stage on those 4 stages of enlightenment is what we call entering the stream of enlightenment. That is because the person falls into the stream of Dhamma which leads them to Nibbana, leads them to enlightenment. They must become enlightened in a maximum of 7 lifetimes. And it will be automatic. Now at this point, the knowledge and vision that arises for the meditator at this point is the knowledge and vision that certain things have been eliminated from their mind, have been completely destroyed, and they can never arise again. And the first thing that the Sotapanna is liberated from is from wrong view of taking the personality as self, as taking the 5 khandhas, the aggregates of body and mind as self. That is destroyed. They no longer view the world as me and mine and I. They view the world quite differently. The next step, next point that is destroyed, the next defilement that is destroyed is doubt. They have absolutely no doubt that this practice, this purification, these 7 forms of purification lead to enlightenment. That's why they have no doubt in the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. They have no doubt in the Buddha's wisdom and his teachings, and they have no doubt that enlightened beings have practiced this path and obtained this experience. And the next thing that they have completely destroyed is belief in rites and rituals in themselves as a way of purification. That is, certain, say, purification processes apart from purifying the mind in themselves are not an ends. So even if you do, say, 10,000 prostrations, that will never take you to enlightenment. Yes. because it is not an end in itself. The only thing that can take you to enlightenment is these 7 stages of enlightenment. Even keeping the 5 precepts in themselves as an end cannot take you to enlightenment, but are the chariot, are the means to take you to the stages which is necessary to going on to the next point. But one realizes that they are not an end in themselves, but a necessary means. And so this is the first stage of what we call a stream enterer. And a stream enterer can never regress. They can never take a lower rebirth apart from a human rebirth. They will not be reborn in a lower hell realm, for example. And the next stage of enlightenment is what we call the Sakatagami, the once returner. That means that they'll be 3 things: personality view, doubt, and belief in rites and rituals as a way of liberation. And they have also weakened sensuality and ill will. It's a lot harder to make a Sakatagami angry, and nor will he have the same degree of sensuality. But he still has an underlying tendency. He has not cut them off, but he has weakened them, these habits of mind. Then the next stage of enlightenment is the anagami, the non-returner. The non-returner means that person will never return to this world again. They have obtained freedom from being born in the world. And that person has completely cut off the first 3 things that I mentioned: personality view, doubt, belief in rites and rituals, and have completely cut off sensuality and ill will. They cannot get angry. They cannot have sensual desire. And then the last stage of enlightenment is the arahata, the fully enlightened person who has cut off all the 10 fetters. The first 5 that I've mentioned, and the next 5 is any desire for material states or immaterial states. These are higher states of consciousness which arise out of concentration. For example, they're not attached to the jhanas anymore. The arahant is not attached to them. The arahant has completely cut off conceit, the sense of I am better than you, I am equal to you, or I am not as good as you. He has completely cut that off. And the arahant has completely cut off restlessness. There's no sense of longing in the mind of the enlightened one. He's not restless to look for something else which will bring him happiness or her happiness. And the enlightened person has destroyed ignorance. They have purified knowledge. They have destroyed the cause for rebirth. And therefore that is why they're called enlightened. And they will not be reborn again. At death they will enter what we call parinibbana, final enlightenment. That is the complete ending of all suffering. There will be no more rebirth. They enter nibbana. And so this is the final purification. So this evening I have talked about the 7 stages of purification that lead up to enlightenment. Each one of those are very important. But as I mentioned right in the beginning, the aim, the purpose, the goal, the final goal of the holy life under the Buddha is for nibbana, with the complete destruction of craving and no more becoming. But to obtain to that, one has to develop these 7 purifications. And just to summarize, the first purification is to purify virtue, to become a good person, to become a virtuous person, to rejoice in virtue, and rejoice in the virtue of others, to actually praise others who are virtuous, to encourage others to be virtuous. But that is not an end in itself. the next is to purify the mind, to develop wholesome thoughts, thoughts of loving kindness, thoughts of compassion, thoughts of joy, sympathetic joy, thoughts of equanimity, thoughts of renunciation. And the next step is to develop purification of view, how you look at yourself and the world. Next is purification of overcoming doubt about the body and mind. Then purification of what is the path and what is not the path. Then purification of the way. And then finally purification, knowledge and vision of the way. And then knowledge and vision, which is the final stage of enlightenment, liberation. So I'd like to end that talk this evening just to make those points that the Buddhist path is a very distinct path. It has the moral factor, it has the concentration factor, and it has the wisdom factor. And each aspect of that path is clearly pointed out and made distinct in the Buddhist teaching. So, thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Yes. That's a good point. The question was, are they developed consecutively or is there overlap? There's definitely an interaction all the time and overlap. Some things help the others, but usually they work together. For example, virtue. Even if you've developed good concentration, if you break your virtue, then you'll find that will affect your ability to concentrate the mind. So they are systematic in a way, and they're interdependent in a way, and rely on each other in a way. But you find that without, say, investigation of, say, the 5 khandhas to overcome doubt, then you won't develop knowledge and vision of what the path is. Yes? So there are certain steps. The wisdom steps tend to be sequential. Yes? The last 5 that I mentioned tend to be sequential. That as you start to investigate, then you start to overcome your doubt, then you start to see the path, and you know the path, and then you realize the path. That's sequential. But they do interact. The more you investigate, the more you overcome your doubt, the more knowledge you get. So they help each other. But also you see how morality and concentration and wisdom are interdependent. Ajahn Chah compared virtue, concentration and wisdom like the 3 legs of a tripod. If you take one away, then it falls over. And that's very true. You have to actually be wise to be virtuous. And that's why a wise person is virtuous. Actually, it takes a lot of wisdom. And actually, so we actually should reflect on that. That is a degree of our wisdom, that we're actually seeking virtue, and we actually respect virtue, and we want to cultivate virtue. That shows that actually we're wise. The Buddha praised that. And we actually have to have a degree of focusing our mind on cultivation of virtue, don't we? It's actually got to be a focus of paying attention and concentration on that, and seeing the benefit of it. So they interact. And to develop concentration, you actually have to be very wise to make the mind concentrated. Because it's actually very difficult to concentrate the mind, as anyone who's meditated can tell you, isn't it? That's why people who develop, the Buddha actually said, those who have jhana develop wisdom. Those who have wisdom develop jhana. Yes, because it's a condition which is normal for a wise person. For example, the anagami and the arahant develop all the jhanas because their wisdom is so brilliant and bright and clear. So they interact very much on that level. And if you remember that simile of the tripod of virtue, concentration, and wisdom, that they interact and they're interdependent, and you can see their connectedness. And that's a good thing to reflect. If you can't make your minds peaceful, why? That's an important question to ask. And I remember a meditation teacher I stayed with who's been in Perth, Ajahn Nyanadhammo, he said, and I find it usually quite true, that he said that the reason we often can't make our minds peaceful is we just haven't done enough goodness in the day. Or not necessarily through action, but thinking enough good thoughts. Yes? And in Buddhism, good thoughts are thoughts of loving kindness, thoughts of compassion, and thoughts of renunciation, giving up. Yes? And that is why actually if you want to actually help yourself to get calm when you sit meditation, just develop a mantra of desirelessness. Because the Buddhist path to enlightenment is towards desirelessness. Ask yourself, what do I want? What do I desire? And just desire nothing. Don't even desire to be peaceful. Yes? Don't desire to be hot or cold or to be quiet or anything. Just desire nothing. And just keep on letting go, putting things down. And if you just use that as a mantra, desire nothing. Desirelessness. Desire less. It's very hard to actually go straight to desirelessness. That's impossible. What we do is actually desire less first. So how much do you want? Yeah? If you want a lot, then you're going to suffer a lot. If you want less, then you're going to suffer less. If you desire nothing, then you're free from suffering. And so that is the spiritual path. I think we'll just call it an end there. And is there any announcements? Dennis?
Thank you, Venerable Nyanadhammo. Good evening, everybody. There's just a couple of announcements tonight. Firstly, just to let you know that there is a meditation course coming up soon, a Burmese meditation course, going to be held on January the 2nd. I think that's right. Is it? Sorry.
It's January the 20th.
Oh, sorry, the 26th.
26th until the 3rd.
Yes, that's right. January the 26th to the 3rd of February. And you might be able to help me with the name again too, Ajahn. Venerable Sayadaw Nyanika. He's apparently a very wise and respected teacher from England. And anyone that's interested in a course like that on that weekend, January the 26th to the 3rd, perhaps you could come and see us. I've got some details of it after the meeting tonight. Also, just to let you know that on the 17th of February, we're having our Chinese New Year celebrations here. There's going to be sweet and sour spicy food fair. That's from 4 till 7 p.m. Food coupons are available at the desk for $5 per booklet. Now, this is going to be a very special night because after the food fair, there's a cultural show that'll be going on from 7 o'clock until around 8:30 p.m. And this includes a lion dance, martial arts exhibitions, all sorts of cultural dances and other sorts of shows. These are very, very good nights that we have actually on the Chinese New Year. I'd recommend anyone that hasn't been to one to make an effort to come along on that night, February the 17th. There's also a very special thing that's going with it. There's a camel rides here. Quite a thing for the neighbours to see. 4 o'clock till 7 p.m. we'll have camels here for camel rides as well. Of course, the library's open tonight till 10 o'clock. For anyone that would like to browse through the library, of course, members can take books out. And just also a reminder that the annual general meeting is coming up on Saturday the 24th at 4 p.m. and I'd certainly would like to encourage all full members especially to come along. Anyone is certainly welcome to come along and see the annual general meeting or attend it, but we're especially looking for the full members to come along so that we can make it a well-represented meeting. So that's Saturday the 24th of February for the annual general meeting.
We'll pay our respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha.
Oh